There's a hidden debt attached to every home in the Villages that almost no one talks about until it's too late. It's not in your mortgage, it's not optional, and it will cost you between $3,000 and $6,000 every single year for the next 30 years, even after your house is paid off. That's up to $180,000 in pure debt that you'll never escape. Now multiply that by the monthly fees, the mandatory amenities, the inflated insurance rates, and suddenly your affordable retirement home is bleeding you dry. And here's the kicker. You can't sell your way out of it because every buyer inherits the same trap. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is legal, documented, and happening right now to people who thought they were living the dream. So here's what you need to understand, and I'm going to be completely direct with you because your financial future depends on it. You've been lied to about what retirement in Florida looks like. Not by your friends, not by your family, but by a $2 billion marketing machine that profits every time you believe that happiness can be purchased with a golf cart and a zip code. This video exists because most people discover the truth about the Villages 6 months after they move in, when the first round of surprise fees hits, when they realize the beach is a 2-hour round trip, when the social pressure to conform becomes suffocating, when they understand that they've traded autonomy for amenity and can't afford to trade back. The core pain you're facing is this. You've worked your entire life for freedom, and you're about to spend your life savings on a beautiful, insidious trap that will make you less free, not more. And the myth we're busting today is that a retirement community with endless activities equals a fulfilling retirement. The truth. Manufactured busyness is not the same as purpose. Constant distraction is not the same as peace, and being surrounded by people is not the same as belonging. What you'll get from this video is a clear-eyed, emotionally honest breakdown of the 3 traps the Villages sets: financial, geographical, and social, that no one tells you about until you're locked in. You'll understand the hidden costs that will drain your retirement savings, the isolation disguised as paradise, and the social conformity dressed up as community. More importantly, you'll learn how to protect yourself from making a $250,000 mistake based on a fantasy. And what makes this different from every other Villages review you've watched is that I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not a realtor with a vested interest. This is pattern recognition, data, and honest conversation about what freedom actually costs and why sometimes the thing that looks most like the dream is actually the nightmare you need to wake up from. So let me start by painting you 2 pictures of the same life, and I want you to pay attention to what happens between these 2 moments because that's where the trap closes. Picture 1. You're 62 years old. You've just retired after 35 years of work. You and your spouse have been dreaming about this moment for 3 decades. You've visited the Villages twice, once for a weekend tour where they picked you up in a golf cart and drove you around pristine neighborhoods with names like Spanish Springs and Brownwood. Once for a week-long preview stay where you got to sample the lifestyle, the restaurants, the entertainment, the pickleball courts. Both times it felt magical. Golf carts everywhere, thousands of them, decorated with flags and bumper stickers and custom paint jobs. Smiling faces at every turn. Endless sunshine. The sound of live music drifting from the town squares every single night. People dancing in the streets. Strangers waving at you like you're already part of the family. You toured a beautiful model home with crown molding and granite countertops and a screened-in lanai overlooking a perfectly manicured lawn. The sales agent, friendly, never pushy, just genuinely helpful, walked you through the numbers. The home price seemed reasonable, maybe $350,000 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. The monthly fees seemed manageable. A couple $100 for the HOA, some amenity fees, nothing you couldn't handle. You asked questions. You did your research. You felt smart, cautious, responsible. And after talking it over with your spouse, after praying about it, after calling your kids, you decided this was it. This was the dream you'd been saving for. You signed the papers on a Friday afternoon with champagne in hand, the sales agent congratulating you, telling you that you're going to love it here, that you've made the best decision of your life. You took pictures in front of your new home, posted them on Facebook, and within an hour you had 73 likes and comments from friends saying, "Living the dream." So happy for you guys. You deserve this. That night, you went to bed feeling like you'd won. Like after all those years of hard work and sacrifice and delayed gratification, you'd finally arrived at the life you were promised. Now picture two. It's 18 months later. You're sitting at your kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills you didn't anticipate. There's the CDD bond payment, $400 a month, and you didn't fully understand what that was when you signed. The agent mentioned it, sure, but it was buried in paperwork and it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. But now you understand. It's a 30-year debt attached to your property. 30 years. You'll be 92 years old when it's finally paid off if you're still alive. There's the HOA fee that just went up again, from $220 a month to $260. They sent a letter explaining that maintenance costs have increased, and this is necessary to preserve property values. There's the rec center fee, the trash collection fee, the mandatory street lighting fee, the stormwater management fee. Fees you didn't even know existed. Your homeowner's insurance in Florida has doubled since you bought the house. Doubled. You're now paying almost $5,000 a year just to insure a home you thought you'd retire in peacefully. Your car insurance went up too because apparently everyone in the Villages drives golf carts like they're invincible, and the accident rates are higher than anyone wants to admit. You wanted to visit your daughter in Tampa last weekend, but it's a 90-minute drive each way through traffic, and you just don't have the energy anymore. You haven't been to the beach in 4 months, even though that was one of the main reasons you moved to Florida. The beach, the ocean, the salt air, the sunsets. But the nearest real beach is over an hour away, and by the time you factor in the drive and the parking and the exhaustion of it all, it just feels like too much. You thought you'd make close friends here, deep friendships, the kind where you can be vulnerable and honest and real. But everyone here is so busy. Pickleball at 8 in the morning, water aerobics at 10, lunch at noon, cards at 2, happy hour at 5, live music at 7. There's always something happening, always somewhere to be, and yet no one ever talks about anything real. No one mentions politics unless they already know you agree with them. No one mentions money problems, even though you suspect you're not the only one struggling with these bills. No one mentions health scares or fears about aging or doubts about whether moving here was the right decision. Everyone just smiles and waves from their golf carts, and you smile and wave back. And you're surrounded by 130,000 people, and you've never felt more alone in your life. You lie in bed at night, doing math in your head, the mortgage payment, the CDD bond, the HOA, the insurance, the property taxes, the utilities, the golf cart payment, because yes, you had to buy a golf cart because that's how you get around here. And everyone has one, and if you don't have one, you're basically a shut-in. And it all adds up to way more than you planned. Way more than you can comfortably afford on your fixed income. And you think about selling, about cutting your losses and moving somewhere else, somewhere cheaper, somewhere closer to your kids. But then you look at the real estate market and you realize that selling means taking a loss, and it means the next buyer inherits the same CDD debt you're drowning in, which means finding a buyer is harder than you thought. And even if you do sell, where would you go? You already sold your previous home. You already uprooted your entire life. You already told everyone this was the dream. So you smile, you wave, you go to pickleball even though your knees hurt. You pretend everything is fine. Because everyone else is pretending too. And that's the scariest part. The collective delusion. The unspoken agreement that no one is allowed to admit this might have been a mistake. Here's what happened between picture 1 and picture 2. You moved into a business model disguised as a community. And the thing about business models is they're not designed to make you happy. They're designed to make money. Consistently. Predictably. From you. Month after month, year after year, until you die or go broke, whichever comes first. Now let me tell you another story, and this one's a metaphor, but I want you to really sit with it because it explains something essential about what the Villages actually is. Imagine someone offers you a free vacation to a private island. This island is beautiful. World-class amenities. Perfect weather year-round. Tennis courts and swimming pools and gourmet restaurants and nightly entertainment. Everything you could possibly want. There's just one catch, and they're very upfront about it. Once you're on the island, everything costs more. The food costs more because it has to be shipped in. The entertainment costs more because you're a captive audience and there's nowhere else to go. The housing costs more because supply is limited and demand is high. And leaving the island, even just for a day trip to the mainland, requires significant time, energy, and planning. You have to take a ferry. You have to navigate traffic. You have to make it an event. Now imagine, you don't just vacation on this island. Imagine you buy property there. You sell your home on the mainland. You move all your belongings across the water. You build your entire social life around the other people on the island. And slowly, over time, without even realizing it's happening, you stop leaving. You stop visiting the mainland. It becomes too much work, too exhausting, too complicated. Your world shrinks to the boundaries of the island. The restaurants you eat at, the stores you shop at, the people you talk to, the activities you participate in, all of it exists within this 50 square mile bubble. And you tell yourself it's fine because everything you need is here. But deep down, in a place you don't like to acknowledge, you know the truth. This isn't freedom. This is just a prettier cage. That's the Villages. It's not in Florida. It's a 50 square mile island inside Florida, landlocked in the center of the state, completely disconnected from the things most people actually move to Florida for. No beaches, no international airports nearby, no cultural diversity, no major medical centers. Just an artificial paradise that costs more every single month and makes it harder and harder to leave. So why do people fall for it? And more importantly, what are the specific mechanisms of this trap? Because once you understand how it works, once you see the machinery beneath the surface, you can't be caught by it. So let's break it down. Let's go deep into the three traps: financial, geographical, and social. And I'm going to give you details that no sales agent will ever tell you. Numbers that don't appear in the brochures. Patterns that only become visible after you've talked to enough people who lived it. Let's start with the big one. The one that destroys retirement budgets and creates financial stress that people didn't see coming. The financial trap. The money you didn't know you'd spend. When you buy a home in the Villages, you're not just buying real estate. You're buying into a financial structure called a Community Development District, or CDD. And unless you're a financial expert or a very, very careful reader of fine print, you probably have no idea what that means until it's too late. So let me explain it in plain language, the kind of language the developers don't want you to understand too clearly. Here's how it works. The developers of the Villages, and this is legal, this is how planned communities are built in Florida, they borrow massive amounts of money up front to build the infrastructure. The roads, the sewer systems, the streetlights, the rec centers, the golf courses, the town squares. All of that costs billions of dollars to build. So the developers go to bond markets, they issue municipal bonds, and they borrow that money. Then, and this is the key part, that debt gets packaged into bonds and those bonds get attached to the properties. When you buy a house in the Villages, you inherit a portion of that infrastructure debt. It's called a CDD bond assessment, and it's typically a 20 to 30-year obligation that you will pay every single year. On top of your mortgage, on top of your property taxes, on top of everything else. For many homes in the Villages, this assessment runs between $3,000 and $6,000 per year. Let's do the math on the conservative end. $3,000 a year for 30 years is $90,000. That's $90,000 you will pay, separate from your mortgage, just for the privilege of living there. On the higher end, $6,000 a year for 30 years is $180,000. That's not a typo. $180,000? That is a second mortgage you didn't plan for, a mortgage that never goes away, that you can never refinance, that you cannot escape. And here's the part that makes people feel betrayed when they finally understand it. Even after you pay off your actual mortgage, even after your house is 100% yours, even after you've made that final payment and you own the property free and clear, this CDD debt keeps coming. Every single year. Because it's attached to the land, not the loan. It's a tax, essentially, a special assessment that funds the bonds that paid for the infrastructure. And those bonds have a maturity date 30 years out. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but the sales agent told me about this, right? It was disclosed, and yes, technically, it was disclosed. But here's how it actually happens in practice. You're sitting in a sales office. You've just fallen in love with a model home. The agent is friendly, knowledgeable, never pushy. They walk you through a worksheet: purchase price, down payment, estimated mortgage payment, property taxes, HOA fees. Everything seems reasonable. Then, almost as an afterthought, they mention the CDD assessment. Oh, and there's also a CDD fee. It's about $300 a month that goes toward infrastructure, roads, and lights and things like that. $300 a month doesn't sound that bad, right? It's less than a car payment. So you nod, you initial the disclosure, you move on. What you don't realize in that moment is that $300 a month is $3,600 a year. For 30 years, that's $108,000. And that's just the assessment. That doesn't include the interest that's already baked into those bonds, the administrative fees, the potential for the assessment to increase if the infrastructure needs repairs or upgrades. You signed up for a financial obligation that will outlast most marriages, that will follow you into your 80s and 90s, that will eat into your fixed income month after month after month. But wait, it gets worse. And I need you to stay with me here, because this is where people's retirement budgets fall apart. On top of the CDD bond, you've got your HOA fees, homeowner association fees. These vary by neighborhood within the Villages, but they typically run between $150 and $300 per month. Sometimes more for premium neighborhoods. That's another $1,800 to $3,600 per year. And they go up every year, sometimes by small amounts, $5 or $10 a month. Sometimes by larger amounts when the board decides that landscaping needs to be upgraded, or the clubhouse needs a new roof, or the streets need repaving. You have no control over these increases. You get a letter in the mail saying, effective next month, your HOA fee is going up. And you can't vote it down. You can attend the HOA meeting and voice your concerns, sure, but the decision has already been made. Because the HOA is run by a board, and that board is often influenced by the developer, especially in the newer neighborhoods, and the priority is maintaining property values and aesthetics, not keeping costs low for people on fixed incomes. Then you've got the amenity fees. This is where it gets really insidious. The Villages markets itself on lifestyle. The commercials, the brochures, the testimonials, they all show people playing golf, swimming in beautiful pools, working out in state-of-the-art fitness centers, taking classes, joining clubs. And when you do that preview stay, you get access to all of it. You think, wow, this is included. This is what I'm paying for. But once you move in, you realize that not everything is included. Want to use the executive golf courses? That requires a membership. Want access to the premium fitness centers? That's an additional fee. Want to take classes at the Enrichment Academy? Some are free, some cost extra. Want to join certain clubs that use specific facilities? There are dues. And suddenly you're paying an extra $100, $200, $300 a month just to access the lifestyle you thought you were buying into. Now let's talk about Florida-specific costs, because people who move from other states, especially northern states, are often blindsided by this. Homeowners insurance in Florida has skyrocketed over the past 5 years. It's not uncommon for retirees in the Villages to pay $4,000 to $6,000 a year just to insure a modest home. Why? Because Florida is hurricane territory. Because insurance companies have been pulling out of the state. Because the ones that remain have jacked up premiums to cover risk. And if you're financing your home, insurance is mandatory. You don't get a choice. Property taxes in Florida are higher than many people expect. Yes, Florida has no state income tax, and that's a selling point. But property taxes, especially on newer homes in planned communities, can be substantial. You're looking at $3,000 to $5,000 a year, sometimes more, depending on the assessed value of your home. And unlike some states where property taxes are stable, Florida allows for reassessments that can increase your bill significantly. Car insurance in Florida is among the highest in the nation. Why? Because Florida is a no-fault state with high rates of uninsured drivers and insurance fraud. If you're moving from a state like Ohio or Pennsylvania where you were paying $1,000 a year for car insurance, you're going to be shocked when you get a quote in Florida for $2,500 or $3,000. And if you're keeping 2 cars, which most couples do, that's $5,000 or $6,000 a year just for auto insurance. Add it all up. Let's say you bought a $350,000 home in the Villages. You put down 20%, So you're financing $280,000. At current interest rates, let's say 6%, your mortgage payment is about $1,600 a month. You thought that would be your main expense, but in reality, here's what you're actually paying every single month. $1,600 for the mortgage, $400 for the CDD bond assessment, $200 for HOA fees, $300 for homeowners insurance, $250 for property taxes, $150 for various amenity fees, trash collection, stormwater management, all the little things that add up. That's $2,900 per month. Not $1,600, $2,900, and that's before utilities, before maintenance. Before the golf cart you're socially obligated to own, which costs anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000 to buy and a couple hundred a year to maintain and insure. Now let's say you're living on Social Security and a modest pension. Maybe you're bringing in $4,000 a month combined. After you pay your housing costs, you have $1,100 left. For food, for gas, for medications, for travel, for helping your grandkids with college, for anything unexpected like a medical bill or a car repair. That $1,100 gets eaten up fast, and suddenly you're living month to month, stressed about money, in a place you moved to specifically to relax and enjoy your retirement. Here's the dark truth that no one wants to say out loud. The Villages was designed to extract maximum revenue from a population that is generally on a fixed income and cannot easily relocate. You are not the customer. You are the product. Your monthly fees are the subscription model. The developers built this place, sold you the dream, locked you into decades of payments, and now they're collecting. Month after month, year after year. And once you're in, the switching costs, financially, logistically, emotionally, are so high that most people just accept it and keep paying. Think about it this way. If you wanted to leave the Villages after 2 years because you realized it's not what you thought, what would you have to do? You'd have to sell your home. But selling means finding a buyer who's willing to inherit your CDD bond. And buyers are getting smarter. They're starting to ask questions. They're starting to do the math. So your home sits on the market longer than you expected. And while it's sitting there, you're still paying the mortgage, the CDD, the HOA, all of it. Maybe you finally sell, but you take a loss because the market softened, or because you're desperate to get out. Now you've lost money on the sale, you've lost 2 years of payments that you'll never get back, and you have to start over somewhere else. Most people can't afford to do that, so they stay. They're trapped. And that's not an accident. That's the design. The financial structure of the Villages is engineered to make it very expensive to leave and very difficult to escape. It's a roach motel. You check in, but you don't check out. Now let's talk about the second trap, and this one is geographic. This one is about location, isolation, and the slow realization that you're not actually living in Florida. You're living in a bubble inside Florida, cut off from everything that makes the state worth living in. When people say they're retiring to Florida, what do they actually mean? Close your eyes and picture it. What's the image in your head? I'm willing to bet it's this. Beaches, white sand and turquoise water. Watching the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico with a drink in your hand. Walking barefoot along the shore. Hearing the waves, feeling the ocean breeze. Maybe it's palm trees swaying. Maybe it's a coastal town with art galleries and seafood restaurants and a laid-back vibe. That's the Ikiad, Florida dream. That's what people save for. That's what they romanticize during 30 years of cold winters in Michigan or Illinois or New York. The Villages offers none of that. Let me show you something on a map, and I want you to really understand the geography here because it matters more than you think. The Villages is located in central Florida, essentially between Ocala and Leesburg. It is approximately 60 to 75 miles from the nearest real beach, depending on which part of the Villages you're in and which coast you're headed to. The Gulf Coast, Clearwater, St. Pete, Crystal River, that's about 70 miles. The Atlantic Coast, Daytona, New Smyrna, that's about 65 miles. Now, 60 or 70 miles doesn't sound that bad, right? An hour drive, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. Totally doable for a day trip, except it's not just 60 or 70 miles. It's 60 or 70 miles through central Florida traffic. on two-lane highways, through small towns with stoplights, past truck stops and strip malls and agricultural land. In good traffic on a weekday morning, it's about 90 minutes each way. In bad traffic, especially on weekends or during tourist season or in the winter when the snowbirds are down, it's closer to 2 hours each way. So let's do the math on what a day at the beach actually looks like when you live in the Villages. You wake up, you have breakfast, you pack a cooler, you get in the car by 9 a.m. You drive for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. You arrive at the beach around 11. You find parking, which in season can take another 20 or 30 minutes. You walk to the beach, you set up your chairs, you finally relax. By this point, it's almost noon. You stay for a few hours because you drove all this way, so you might as well make it worth it. You leave around 3 to beat the traffic. You pack up, you walk back to the car, you drive home. You get back to the Villages around 5 or 5:30, exhausted, sunburned, and it's time for dinner. That's your day. That's what going to the beach requires. And for some people, for younger retirees with energy and stamina, maybe that's fine. Maybe they do it once a month and it feels like an adventure. But for most people, especially as they get older, especially as mobility issues or health problems start creeping in, that 4-hour round trip becomes prohibitive. It becomes something they think about doing but never actually do. And slowly, month by month, year by year, the beach stops being part of their life. It becomes a memory from the preview tour, a fantasy they had about what retirement in Florida would be like, not the reality they're actually living. And it's not just the beaches. The Villages is also about 60 miles from Orlando International Airport. Again, 90 minutes to 2 hours in traffic. Which means every time your kids visit, every time your grandkids come down, every time you want to travel somewhere, you're adding significant drive time and stress. You're navigating I-75 or the Florida Turnpike, both of which are notorious for accidents and congestion. You're planning your airport runs around rush hour. You're leaving 3 hours before a flight just to be safe. It's exhausting, and over time you start traveling less. Your kids start visiting less because, let's be honest, flying into Orlando and then driving another 2 hours to the Villages is a pain. They'd rather you come visit them. But you're tired, and the cycle continues. Here's the other geographic reality that people don't think about until it's too late. There are no major hospitals in the Villages proper. There are medical centers, yes. Urgent care clinics, yes. Doctors' offices, plenty. But the nearest level 1 trauma centers, the kind of hospitals you need if you have a heart attack or stroke or a serious accident, those are in Ocala or Leesburg, 30 to 45 minutes away. In an emergency, every minute counts. 30 minutes can be the difference between life and death, between full recovery and permanent disability. Now, I'm not trying to be morbid here, but this is a community that markets itself to people over 55. The average age of a resident in the Villages is somewhere in the mid to late 60s, with a significant population in their 70s and 80s. Medical emergencies are not theoretical. They happen. And when they do, you want to be close to world-class medical care. You don't want to be an hour away in the middle of Central Florida. What you end up with is this. You move to Florida for freedom, for adventure, for a change of scenery, for access to everything the state has to offer. But you've placed yourself in a location that makes all of that exhausting. The beaches you dreamed about are too far. The airports you need are too far. The hospitals you might depend on are too far. And slowly, imperceptibly, your world shrinks. You stop exploring. You stop leaving the Villages. Florida becomes this abstract thing that exists outside your bubble, something you live near but never actually experience. The beach becomes a once or twice a year event instead of a weekly ritual. Travel becomes too complicated, and you become a prisoner of convenience. This is what I call the Truman Show effect. Do you remember that movie? Jim Carrey lives in this perfect little town. Everything is beautiful and friendly and clean, and he doesn't realize that the entire town is a TV set, that nothing exists beyond the edges of his world. That's the Villages. Everything you need is technically inside the bubble. Grocery stores, restaurants, doctors, dentists, banks, pharmacies, entertainment, all of it. So you stop leaving. The infrastructure of your daily life has been designed to keep you inside, spending money inside, living your entire existence inside someone else's carefully constructed business plan. And here's the paradox that people don't see until they're living it. You move to Florida for freedom, but you've chosen a location that makes freedom exhausting. The cost of leaving, even just for a day, is so high in terms of time and energy and planning that you stop doing it. And freedom that you never exercise isn't freedom at all. It's just a theoretical possibility that slowly fades into regret. Now let's talk about the third trap, and this is the one that's hardest to discuss because it gets into uncomfortable territory. But it might be the most important one because you can budget for money, you can plan around geography, but the social and emotional cost of living in a monoculture is something that catches people completely off guard. This is the social trap, the cost of manufactured community. The Villages is one of the most demographically homogeneous places in America. And I'm not editorializing here, I'm stating a fact. It is overwhelmingly white, over 95% according to census data. It is overwhelmingly conservative politically, with Trump flags and signs visible throughout the community. It is overwhelmingly wealthy, or at least upper middle class, because you need significant assets to afford to live there. And by design, by legal mandate, it is overwhelmingly over the age of 55. There are no children except visiting grandchildren. There are no teenagers. There are very few young adults. There is very little racial diversity. There is very little socioeconomic diversity. There is very little political diversity. And on the surface, some people see this as a feature, not a bug. They say things like, I want to be around people like me. I've worked hard my whole life. I've dealt with enough stress and conflict and difference. I just want to relax and not have to think about politics or social issues or anything heavy. I just want to play golf and enjoy my retirement. And I understand that impulse, I really do. After decades of work and responsibility and navigating a complicated, divided world, the idea of a simple, peaceful, uniform community sounds incredibly appealing. But here's what actually happens when you remove all diversity. Not just racial diversity, but diversity of age, of thought, of perspective, of experience. You don't get peace, you get pressure. Intense, suffocating social pressure to conform. The Villages has developed a reputation, and this is documented in news articles, in social media posts, in countless personal testimonies from current and former residents, for being cliquish, judgmental, and unwelcoming to anyone who doesn't fit the mold. If you're not into golf, you're an outsider. If you don't play pickleball, people wonder what's wrong with you. If you're not politically conservative, you learn very quickly to keep your mouth shut, because expressing a different opinion can lead to arguments, shunning, or worse. If you don't participate in the endless calendar of activities, if you prefer quiet evenings at home, if you like to read or garden or just be alone, people start gossiping. They wonder if you're depressed, they wonder if you're unfriendly. There's an unspoken expectation that you will participate, that you will be social, that you will conform to the lifestyle that everyone else is living. There's a term for this in sociology. It's called enforced homogeneity, and it creates a kind of groupthink that can be psychologically damaging. You start policing your own thoughts, your own opinions, your own preferences because you're terrified of being excluded from a community you spent your life savings to join. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You agree with statements you don't actually agree with. You perform a version of yourself that fits the mold, and you bury the parts of yourself that don't. And over time, that performance becomes exhausting. You start to forget who you actually are underneath all the smiling and waving and pretending. And here's the bizarre thing. Even surrounded by 130,000 people, many residents report feeling deeply lonely. Because surface-level friendliness is not the same as true connection. Waving from golf carts, making small talk at happy hour, playing cards with people whose names you can barely remember, that's not intimacy. That's not friendship, that's social lubrication. It keeps the machinery running, but it doesn't feed your soul. True connection requires vulnerability. It requires disagreement. It requires difference. It requires the ability to say, I see the world differently than you do, and to still be accepted. It requires depth, messy conversations, the willingness to be known, not just liked. And the Villages culture actively discourages all of that, because conflict is bad for business. Discomfort is bad for the brand, so everyone stays on the surface and loneliness festers underneath. There's also the issue of the scandals, and I'm going to tread carefully here because I don't want to sensationalize, but these things have been widely reported and they point to a larger truth. The Villages has been the subject of numerous news stories about unusually high rates of sexually transmitted infections among seniors. It's been in the news for political clashes that turned violent, for public displays of aggression and intolerance. It's been profiled as a hotbed of partisan extremism, with residents openly hostile to anyone who doesn't share their political views. Now you might think, okay, but every place has problems. Every community has conflicts. And that's true. But here's the difference. In a diverse community, in a normal town with a mix of ages and backgrounds and perspectives, there are checks and balances. There are different voices. There's accountability from outside the bubble. But in a place like the Villages, where everyone is the same age, the same race, the same political affiliation, where there's no one to push back, no one to offer a different perspective, things can go sideways fast. The bubble becomes a pressure cooker. Behavior that would be moderated in a normal social environment gets amplified. Groupthink becomes radicalization, and people start acting in ways that, if you described it to them 5 years earlier, they would have been horrified. I'm not saying everyone in the Villages is extreme or unhealthy. That's not true. There are plenty of kind, reasonable, wonderful people living there. But the environment itself, the structure of it, creates conditions that can bring out the worst in people, not the best. And if you're someone who values diversity, who thrives on different perspectives, who finds meaning in engaging with people who challenge you and expand your worldview, the Villages will feel suffocating. You'll feel like you're living in a theme park version of real life, where everything is sanitized and controlled and fake. Here's the emotional reality that people don't want to face. You cannot buy belonging, you cannot purchase depth. And a community that looks perfect on the outside is often the most fractured on the inside. Because perfection is a performance, and performances are exhausting to maintain. So now what? What do you do with all this information? Because the goal here isn't just to tear down the Villages, to make you afraid, to leave you feeling cynical and hopeless. The goal is to help you make a decision that actually serves your life. A decision based on clarity, not marketing. Based on reality, not fantasy. So, let's talk about what freedom really looks like and what you can actually do to protect yourself. First, if you're seriously considering the Villages, or any planned retirement community for that matter, here's what you need to do before you sign a single piece of paper. You need to do the real math, not the math the sales agent shows you, not the numbers in the brochure, the real, complete, honest math. Step 1. Get the full financial picture in writing. Not verbal promises, not estimates, not ballpark figures, in writing. You need every single recurring cost itemized and documented. The CDD bond assessment, and I want to see the annual amount and the total amount over the full 30-year term. The HOA fees, and I want to see the current rate, and I want to see the historical rate increases over the past 10 years so I can project future increases. The amenity fees, itemized, every single one, property taxes, and I want to see projected amounts based on the assessed value of the home. Insurance, and I'm not talking about estimates, I'm talking about actual quotes from Florida insurance companies for that specific property. Utilities, and I want to see average monthly costs from actual residents, not theoretical numbers. Mandatory fees for trash collection, street lighting, stormwater management, all the little things that add up and that no one mentions until you're already living there. Add it all up, write it down on a piece of paper. Multiply by 12. That's your real annual housing cost. Not the number in your head, not the number you're hoping for, the real number. Step 2. Compare that number to your fixed retirement income. Social Security, pension, 401k distributions, annuities, whatever you're actually living on. Be honest, be conservative. Don't assume the stock market is going to keep going up. Don't assume you'll be able to do part-time work to supplement your income, because what if you can't? What if your health doesn't allow it? What if the job market changes? Use the guaranteed income you know you'll have and nothing more. If your housing costs are eating up more than 30% of your income, you're in dangerous territory. Financial advisors will tell you that. 30% is the threshold. If you're at 40 or 50%, you're one medical emergency, one major car repair, one unexpected expense away from financial disaster. And in retirement, unexpected expenses are not theoretical. They're inevitable. Things break, bodies break, life happens. Step 3, run a what-if scenario. And this is where most people fail because they only plan for the best case. They assume everything will go smoothly. They assume costs will stay stable. They assume they'll stay healthy. But hope is not a financial strategy. So ask yourself, what if insurance doubles in 5 years? It's already happened in Florida. What if it happens again? Can you afford an extra $3,000 or $4,000 a year in insurance premiums? What if HOA fees increase 5% annually, which is not uncommon? Where does that put you in 10 years? What if you or your spouse needs long-term care and you have to sell the house in a market downturn? Do you have a financial cushion, or are you betting everything on best-case scenarios? If the numbers don't work comfortably, if you're having to stretch to make it work, if you're relying on everything going perfectly, walk away. Do not let emotion override math. Do not let the fear of missing out, the pressure from a sales agent, the excitement of the moment, push you into a decision that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Here's practice number 2, and this one is simple but powerful. Visit the real Florida before you decide. Don't just visit the villages. Don't just take the curated tour where they show you the best of everything and hide the rest. Visit actual coastal Florida, the places people dream about when they imagine retiring to Florida. Spend one full month, and I mean this, one full month, living in actual coastal Florida. Rent an Airbnb in St. Petersburg or Sarasota or Naples or Dunedin or St. Augustine or any of the dozens of beautiful coastal towns that offer everything the Villages doesn't. Live like a local. Wake up in the morning and walk to the beach. Get coffee at a local cafe. Go to the farmer's market. Explore the downtown. Visit the museums and galleries and parks. Meet people who aren't all retired, who aren't all the same age, who aren't all living in a manufactured bubble. Talk to them. Ask them what it's like to live there year-round. And then ask yourself, honestly, is this what I actually want? Or have I been sold a fantasy? Because here's the thing, Florida is a big, diverse, beautiful state with hundreds of small and medium-sized towns and communities that offer real beaches, real culture, real diversity, real connection, and real freedom, without the manufactured bubble of the villages, without the CDD debt, without the endless fees, without the social pressure to conform. You can find a beautiful home in a walkable coastal town for the same price or less than you'd pay in the villages. You can be 5 minutes from the beach instead of 90 minutes. You can have neighbors of all ages, families with kids playing in the streets, young couples walking their dogs, retirees like you who chose a real community over a theme park. You can have access to culture, to diversity of thought and experience, to the kind of richness that makes life interesting. And if you visit the coast and you realize, you know what, I actually don't care about the beach that much. I really just want the activities and the structure and the social calendar, then fine. At least you made that choice consciously. At least you're not going to wake up 2 years from now with regret and resentment, wondering why you're paying a fortune to live an hour and a half from the thing you thought you were moving for. Here's practice number 3, and this one is about your soul, not your wallet. Redefine what community actually means to you. Because I think a lot of the appeal of the villages and places like it is this deep fear of loneliness in retirement. This fear that if you're not in a place where activities are constantly happening and people are constantly around, you're going to be isolated and forgotten, and you're going to die alone and sad. But let me ask you this. What do you actually need from a community? Is it constant activity, or is it depth? Is it surface-level friendliness, smiling and waving from golf carts? Or is it real, vulnerable connection where people know your name and your story and your struggles? Is it being surrounded by people exactly like you, people who agree with everything you say and think and believe? Or is it being challenged, surprised, expanded by difference by people who see the world differently and make you think and grow? Because if what you truly crave is belonging, you will not find it in a place where everyone is required to be the same. Belonging comes from being fully yourself and being accepted anyway. It comes from disagreement that doesn't end relationships. It comes from neighbors who know when you're struggling and show up with a casserole, not because there's a social obligation, but because they actually care. It comes from diversity, from mess, from the uncomfortable and beautiful reality of real human connection. The irony, and this is something that former Villages residents have told me over and over again, is that some of the deepest, most fulfilling retirement communities in Florida are the ones that don't market themselves as retirement communities at all. They're just small towns with a mix of ages, backgrounds, perspectives, where retirees are part of the fabric, not segregated from it. Where you're not living in a bubble, you're living in the world. And that means you get to interact with young families and struggling artists and college students and immigrants and people whose lives look nothing like yours. And that friction, that diversity, that's what keeps you alive. That's what keeps you growing. That's what makes life rich. So before you move anywhere, ask yourself, am I running towards something, or am I running away from the fear of being alone? Because if it's the latter, no amount of pickleball and happy hours will fill that void. Loneliness isn't cured by proximity to bodies, it's cured by depth of connection. And you can't manufacture that. You can only create the conditions for it, and those conditions require vulnerability, authenticity, and the courage to be different. Practice number 4, build a life, not a schedule. One of the most seductive aspects of the Villages is the sheer volume of activities. Clubs for everything, classes for everything, sports leagues, art groups, dance lessons, live music every single night, poker tournaments, trivia nights, wine tastings. There is always something happening. And for people who are terrified of boredom, terrified of retirement, meaning endless empty days with nothing to do and no purpose, this feels like salvation. But here's the uncomfortable truth, and I need you to really hear this. Constant busyness is not the same as a meaningful life. If you're running from activity to avoid sitting with yourself, to avoid the quiet, to avoid the question that retirement forces you to face, which is, now what? Who am I when I'm not defined by my job? What actually matters to me? You're not living. You're distracting yourself from living. Real retirement freedom looks like this: space, silence, time to read the books you never had time for, time to think deeply about the questions you've been too busy to consider, time to create, whether that's painting or writing or woodworking or gardening or cooking, time to rest, truly rest, without guilt or pressure or the feeling that you should be doing something productive. Time to be bored, because boredom is where creativity and self-discovery begin. Boredom is the soil from which new interests and passions grow. If you fill every single hour with scheduled activities, you never get to discover what you actually want to do. You're just following someone else's program. You're letting the community tell you how to spend your time, what to care about, what a good retirement looks like. And that might work for some people, but for a lot of people, it's just another version of the grind they thought they were escaping. So before you move to the Villages or anywhere else, ask yourself this: what do I actually want to do with my retirement? Not what do I think I'm supposed to do? Not what do the brochures tell me I should do? What do I want? Do I want to learn a new language? Do I want to volunteer at a soup kitchen? Do I want to travel slowly, spending months at a time in different places? Do I want to write my memoir? Do I want to mentor young people? Do I want to just sit on a porch and watch the sunset and feel grateful to be alive? There's no wrong answer, but you have to know your answer before you can choose a place to live. Because the place should serve the life you want, not dictate it. And here's what I've learned from talking to people who have truly thriving retirements. The ones who are genuinely happy, who look back with no regrets. It's not the people with the busiest schedules. It's not the people in the fanciest communities. It's the people who have clarity about what matters to them, who have built their lives around those things, and who have the courage to say no to everything else. It's the people who chose depth over breadth, connection over distraction, meaning over comfort. Now let me tell you what this all adds up to, because I want to make sure you see the full picture before we close this out. The Villages is not evil. It's not a scam in the criminal sense. The developers aren't breaking any laws. The sales agents aren't lying exactly. They're just presenting a version of reality that emphasizes the positives and downplays the negatives. They're doing their job. And for some people, a very specific type of person, the villages might actually work. If you're wealthy enough that the costs don't matter, if you genuinely don't care about the beach or cultural diversity, if you thrive on constant activity and don't need depth in your relationships, if you're politically conservative and want to be surrounded by people who think exactly like you do, then maybe, the villages is a fit. But for most people, for the vast majority of people who are sold this dream, it's a trap. A beautiful, well-marketed, financially devastating trap. And the reason it's a trap is because it promises freedom but delivers the opposite. It promises community but delivers isolation. It promises the Florida dream but delivers a landlocked bubble that's cut off from everything that makes Florida worth living in. The three traps are real, and they're interconnected, and they're designed to keep you locked in. Financially, you will pay far more than you expect, for far longer than you expect, with costs that escalate every year and that you cannot escape without taking a significant loss. The CDD bond alone is a form of debt that most people don't understand until they're already committed. Add in the HOA fees, the amenity fees, the insurance costs, the property taxes, and you're looking at a monthly housing bill that can easily run $3,000 or more. And that's not sustainable on a fixed retirement income. It creates stress, anxiety, the feeling of being trapped, of working your whole life for freedom only to end up financially squeezed in your golden years. Geographically, you will be isolated from the very things that make Florida attractive. You're not retiring to Florida. You're retiring to a 50-square-mile compound in the center of the state that happens to be located in Florida. The beaches are too far. The airports are too far. The hospitals are too far. And slowly, your world shrinks to the boundaries of the villages, and Florida becomes this abstract thing you see on postcards but never actually experience. Socially, you will be pressured to conform to a monoculture that prioritizes surface-level harmony over genuine connection. You'll be surrounded by people who look like you and think like you and vote like you, and that might sound appealing at first, but it's suffocating. Because growth requires difference. Connection requires vulnerability, and a community that's this homogeneous doesn't allow for either. You end up performing a version of yourself that fits the mold, and the real you, the complicated, contradictory, messy, beautiful you, gets buried. And loneliness, that deep existential loneliness, sets in. Even surrounded by 130,000 people, you feel unseen. And that's a terrible way to spend your retirement. But here's the good news, and I want you to hold on to this. You now know. You cannot be caught by a trap you can see. You have the information that most people don't get until it's too late. You understand the financial structure. You understand the geographical isolation. You understand the social pressure. And with that knowledge, you can make a different choice. There are alternatives. Florida is a massive state. It's the third most populous state in the country with a stunning diversity of communities. Beautiful coastal towns with real beaches and walkable downtowns and thriving local cultures. Small cities with world-class art scenes and incredible restaurants, and universities that offer lifelong learning. Quiet rural areas with acreage and privacy and peace. Urban neighborhoods with energy and diversity and access to everything. You have options, so many options, and many of them are more affordable than the villages with no CDD debt, with lower insurance costs, with actual access to the things that make Florida worth living in. The goal of retirement is not to fill every hour with distraction. It's not to live in a bubble where everything is controlled and sanitized and fake. The goal is to finally have the space and the freedom to live the life you've always wanted but never had time for. And that life cannot be purchased in a prepackaged community designed by developers whose priority is profit, not your well-being. It has to be chosen carefully and consciously by you, based on what you actually value, based on what actually brings you joy and meaning and peace. So before you sign anything, before you fall in love with a model home, before you let the fear of being alone or bored or irrelevant drive you into a decision you can't undo, pause. Take a breath. Do the math. Visit the alternatives. Ask the hard questions. Talk to people who live in the villages and ask them not about the activities, not about the amenities, but about the costs, the hidden costs, the emotional cost, the ways it's different from what they expected, and then make your choice from a place of clarity, not fear. Your retirement is the reward for a lifetime of work. You've earned it. You've sacrificed for it. You've delayed gratification for decades for this moment. Don't let someone else's profit margin determine how you spend it. Don't let a marketing campaign convince you that happiness looks like a golf cart and a zip code. Don't trade your freedom for the illusion of security. Because here's the truth, real security doesn't come from living in a gated community with endless activities. It comes from financial stability. It comes from living within your means. It comes from having a cushion for the unexpected. It comes from genuine relationships with people who know you and love you, and will show up when things get hard. It comes from living in a place that aligns with your values, that feeds your soul, that makes you feel alive. And real freedom doesn't come from having 100 clubs to join. It comes from having the space and the time and the permission to figure out who you are now that you're not defined by your job. It comes from saying no to things that don't serve you. It comes from building a life that's yours, not someone else's vision of what your life should be. I think we're taught, especially in America, that retirement should look a certain way, that it should be leisure and golf and endless vacation, that it should be comfortable and easy and free from conflict. And there's nothing wrong with comfort and ease. But if that's all you have, if there's no challenge, no growth, no friction, no difference, you're not living. You're just waiting to die. And you deserve more than that. You deserve a retirement that challenges you, that expands you, that introduces you to people and ideas and experiences you never would have encountered if you'd stayed in your bubble. You deserve a retirement where you can be fully yourself, where you can disagree with your neighbors and still be friends, where you can try new things and fail and laugh about it. You deserve a retirement that's rich and complicated and real. And that's not what the Villages offers. The Villages offers simplicity, uniformity, the path of least resistance. And for some people, that's enough. But I don't think it's enough for you, or you wouldn't still be watching this video. I think you're looking for something deeper, something truer, something that honors the full complexity of who you are. So here's my challenge to you. Don't settle. Don't take the easy option just because it's been marketed well. Don't move somewhere just because your friends are moving there or because it's what everyone else is doing. This is your life, your one precious, finite life, and you get to choose how you spend it. Maybe that means renting for a year before you buy, so you can really get a feel for a place without committing. Maybe that means choosing a smaller, less expensive home so you have more financial freedom to travel, to spoil your grandkids, to pursue hobbies. Maybe that means living in a less trendy area that doesn't have a fancy name or a marketing campaign, but that has a real community and real character. Maybe that means staying close to your kids instead of moving to Florida at all, because at the end of the day, the people you love matter more than the weather. Whatever you choose, choose it consciously. Choose it for the right reasons, and make sure it's a choice you can afford, not just financially, but emotionally and socially and spiritually. Because you can't put a price on peace of mind. You can't put a price on genuine connection. You can't put a price on the freedom to be yourself. So let's recap everything we've talked about today, because I know this has been a lot of information, and I want to make sure the key points are crystal clear in your mind. The Villages is marketed as the ultimate retirement dream. Sunshine and golf carts and endless activities and a community of people just like you. But underneath that marketing, underneath the perfectly manicured lawns and the smiling faces and the live music in the town squares, there are 3 traps that will catch you if you're not paying attention. The financial trap. The hidden costs that aren't clearly explained until after you've signed the papers. The CDD bond that can cost you up to $6,000 a year for 30 years. The HOA fees that increase every year. The amenity fees that pile up. The insurance costs that are skyrocketing in Florida. The property taxes. The golf cart you're socially obligated to buy. All of it adds up to a monthly housing cost that's far higher than you anticipated, that eats into your fixed retirement income, that creates stress and anxiety and the feeling of being trapped. And once you're in, the switching costs are so high that most people can't afford to leave. They're stuck paying these fees month after month, year after year, until they run out of money or run out of life. The geographical trap. The isolation that no one warns you about. The Villages is not on the coast. It's not near an airport. It's not near a major hospital. It's in the center of Florida, landlocked, an hour and a half from the nearest real beach, an hour and a half from Orlando Airport, 30 to 45 minutes from the nearest trauma center. And those distances matter more than you think, because over time, the effort required to leave the villages becomes prohibitive. You stop going to the beach, you stop exploring Florida, your world shrinks to the 50-square-mile bubble, and you realize too late that you didn't move to Florida. You move to a compound that happens to be located in Florida. The Truman Show effect. Everything you need is inside the bubble, so you stop leaving, and the freedom you thought you were buying evaporates. The social trap. The cost of living in a monoculture. The Villages is one of the most homogeneous places in America. Same age, same race, same politics, same everything. And while that might sound comfortable at first, it creates intense social pressure to conform. Cliques and groupthink and judgment toward anyone who doesn't fit the mold. Surface-level friendliness that masquerades as community, but leaves you feeling lonely because real connection requires depth, vulnerability, difference, all the things that the Villages culture discourages. You end up surrounded by people and feeling more isolated than ever. And the scandals, the high STD rates, the political extremism, the conflicts, those are symptoms of an unhealthy environment, a pressure cooker with no release valve. These traps are real, they're documented, they're happening to people right now, but you don't have to fall into them. Because you have information, you have clarity, and with that, you can make a different choice. Do the real math before you sign anything. Get every cost in writing. Add it all up. Compare it to your fixed income. Run worst-case scenarios. If the numbers don't work comfortably, walk away. Visit the real Florida before you decide. Spend a month on the coast, live like a local, see if that's actually what you want. Redefine what community means to you. Is it constant activity or is it depth? Is it uniformity or is it diversity? Be honest about what you actually need. And build a life, not a schedule. Figure out what you want to do with your retirement, what brings you meaning and joy and peace, and then choose a place that serves that vision, not a place that dictates it. Your retirement is yours. It's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. It's not something that can be packaged and sold. It's something you have to create thoughtfully and intentionally based on who you are and what you value. And look, I know this video has been pretty heavy on the Villages. I know I've painted a pretty dark picture. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying everyone who lives there is miserable. I'm not saying it's the worst place on earth. I'm just saying it's not what it appears to be. It's not the dream the marketing sells. And for a lot of people, it becomes a very expensive mistake that they can't undo. But there's hope. There are so many other options in Florida. Beautiful places that offer everything the Villages promises. Real community, access to nature, an active lifestyle without the trap. Places where you can actually walk to the beach. Places where your housing costs are reasonable and sustainable. Places where you're part of a real community with people of all ages and backgrounds, not segregated in an age-restricted bubble. Places where you can be yourself, fully and authentically, without pressure to conform. And if you want to learn about those places, if you want to discover the Florida that actually delivers on the dream, the small coastal towns and vibrant cities and hidden gems that most people never hear about because they're not spending millions on marketing, that's what I'm here for. That's what this channel is about. Honest, real, no BS information about retiring in Florida. The good, the bad, and the places actually worth considering. So if this video gave you clarity, if it made you think twice before making a decision you might have regretted, if it saved you from a costly mistake, I'd be really grateful if you'd hit the like button. It helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. If you want more content like this, more deep dives into Florida retirement communities, more honest breakdowns of the real costs and the real benefits and the real trade-offs, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. And please, please leave a comment. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me your experiences. If you live in the Villages, I want to hear from you. If you visited and decided not to move there, I want to know why. If you know someone who moved there and loves it, or someone who moved there and regrets it, share that story. Because this conversation is important. These decisions are huge. They affect the rest of your life. And the more we talk about them openly and honestly, the more we share real information instead of marketing spin, the better decisions we can all make. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with me through this long, detailed, sometimes uncomfortable conversation. I know it's not easy to hear that the dream you've been saving for might not be what you think it is. But I'd rather you be disappointed by a video than devastated by a life choice you can't undo. Your retirement matters, you matter, and you deserve a life that's rich and free and real. Not a life that's been prepackaged and sold to you by people who profit from your fear of being alone or bored or irrelevant. You're better than that. You're smarter than that. And I believe you're going to make a choice that honors the life you've worked so hard to build. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself.